And then I think the second thing that you touched on that was really key for me, and it also took me back to Tom Goddard, chairman of World Out of Home, is that static is still king, right? Like we're always pushing digital out of home, and there's lots of conversations around programmatic digital out of home, but static still plays such a great role in the media mix, as you were saying now, is, it still drives that brand equity. It drives that brand trust. It's got its role, and you can be reactive with it if you just be innovative with how you're using it. And I love that you raised that.
Welcome to today's episode of Beyond the Billboard. If you're not subscribed, please remember to do so. We are the first and only out-of-home podcast in South Africa. Our guest today is Andrew Brunton, who is the Executive Managing Director for EMEA at Billups. Billups is the largest out-of-home specialist agency globally, and although they're not currently active in the South African market, they are active in over 20 markets globally. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us for today's episode.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. I'm looking forward to, telling you all about out of home, or at least giving you some insights.
We're so excited to have you join us today because Billups has a strong reputation in the industry globally around investing in data, technology, and the development of proprietary platforms. All of these things are used to drive the out-of-home industry forward, as well as their business forward. And globally, we're seeing that recently Billups has launched an AI agent, which is actually streamlining the out-of-home planning process. I know here in South Africa, a lot of people have been speaking about this, thinking about how do we streamline these processes. And the launch of Audrey has been very exciting to watch from our market. We will link it in the episode description so you can see the press release, but it's very interesting to see that the use of technologies and new platforms coming to market is coming to life in a real way in a day-to-day perspective. So it's exciting to see that. Our topic for today's episode is a view across EMEA and how technology is driving growth in out-of-home. And we think that Billups is perfectly positioned to have this conversation today because of the use of technology, data, and also building bespoke proprietary tools for your business. But before we get into all the detail of today's episode, I wanted to ask you, Andrew, your perspective on how would you describe the current landscape in out-of-home across EMEA? You sit centrally, and the benefit of that is that sometimes you're able to zoom out and see some of the central themes that are emerging. Sometimes I know when you're busy with your specific brief or your specific market, you really drilled into the detail of where you're at. And every now and then it's great to get a different perspective to see what are some of the major themes that are emerging. If you could share that with us, we'd love to hear.
So one of the great things is, the markets are all different, similar themes across the region, but there's nuances in each market. So the way people commute in Amsterdam is on your bike. The way people commute in the UK or in London is on the underground or buses. So you know that you've got the strategy. If you're looking at a multi-market campaign, you look at a strategy going, hey, I want to hit commuters as they're making their way to work, and I want to hit them when they are hanging out with their friends. So you can do that strategy throughout different markets. But the way you activate it with the tactics are slightly different in each market. So that's the great thing of out of home, that you can be very nuanced to each local market. And it's important to do so. And I think that builds into one of the main themes is really around that context and relevance in the market. We talk a lot about it. I'm sure you guys do in South Africa. Your creative always should be contextually relevant. So if you're in a retail environment, let's talk about what you're trying to sell, the opportunity, and again, trust. Everyone's talking about it once more. Out of home is a real media channel that does drive trust. I think if you look at the simplest way, people don't lie out loud. You wouldn't put a lie on a big billboard. The great thing of out of home is it's a big billboard in front of you. It's a big logo. It's a big slogan. So it really does have that trust. And you tend to have big brands that naturally do drive trust with the audience overall.
For me, what we've seen in the whole of 2025 and into 2026, I know this will continue, is the focus around the contextual relevance and creativity. What are we actually saying in out-of-home messaging? How is that messaging being fit for purpose? We're seeing a lot more fit for purpose advertising that that was specifically created for out-of-home. It wasn't created for any other channel. And I think a few years ago, that really wasn't as obvious to pick up in the market. So I love the themes that you've unpacked from that perspective. And I think that looking at the contextual relevance, I think is really important. And then the trust building. I think that's such a critical point to land is that, out of home builds trust. We know this, we've seen this. This is how the channel is actually being moved forward. So I think the themes that you've unpacked are so relatable to the market in South Africa.
And I think over and above that, which still goes back to context and relevance, is really about how are you activating in the market. Whether you're, approaching the market more on a direct buy of a traditional route, or you're looking to activate through programmatic out of home. The truth is they're just extra tools, or programmatic is just an extra tool in your toolkit of how you can activate out of home. And then the dynamic creative optimization, when you look at the digital out of home, fantastic. That continues to be a main driver creatively to ensure we're delivering the right message at the right time, looking at different triggers. So whether that's from third-party data of what the weather's doing to first-party data of what your sales are doing on a certain colorway of a product. It all helps to build that relevance. But I would say is, there is a lot of concentration in digital out of home and programmatic, which I love and is fantastic. But traditional still has a massive part to play. One, because the inventory, there's still a hell of a lot of traditional locations. But also you can be reactive with traditional. You can have a banner at the top of a building, and if a certain result happens or something happens, you drop it. And with technology, as we're moving on to sort of discussing technology, yeah, it's all about how you activate yes, you can use more data to plan, but also when you're looking at printing, you can print things far quicker than you used to be able to. You can install them far quicker. So technology is all the way across the whole of the out-of-home ecosystem, not just the actual planning and buying, it's the actual activating that you get the creative. You can turn around in a couple of days versus 2 weeks, so on and so on. So technology really is starting to play a greater part in what we're doing from start to finish of planning, buying, and then finally activating.
There's so much that you spoke about now that has been firing off in my mind with so many pieces I wanted to touch on. And I think the first thing for me was what you and Liv were talking about, the contextual relevancy and how important that is from a creative messaging point of view in out of home and taking in the context of where that message will be. So Liv, on the note of, I think we've moved forward as a market, but are we at the place of really bringing in that contextual relevancy of the location? I think there's a lot of more work to be done for that, in my opinion, for out of home in South Africa. I think we've gotten to a better place where creative is now pushing boundaries and there's a lot more creative bravery. But I think we're needing a lot more of that contextual relevancy of where that location is. Although, as I'm saying this, what comes to mind is we had Johanny Jennings, who joined us on the podcast for an episode from Auto in General, who really spoke about their messaging that was tied for insurance was tied into the messaging in the mall space, right? So if someone had hit your car with the trolley, they had a message there to say, for, small dents and stuff, this is who you should talk to, is Auto and General Insurance. So they had that type of contextual relevancy, relevant messaging in the mall space. But I think as in comparison to some of the European markets or the global markets, we're not in that space of full maturity yet when it comes to really fulfilling those contextual relevant messaging. And then I think the second thing that you touched on that was really key for me, and it also took me back to Tom Goddard, chairman of World Out of Home, is that static is still king, right? Like we're always pushing digital out of home, and there's lots of conversations around programmatic digital out of home, but static still plays such a great role in the media mix, as you were saying now, is, it still drives that brand equity. It drives that brand trust. It's got its role, and you can be reactive with it if you just be innovative with how you're using it. And I love that you raised that. And I think the third piece for me, which is really, really what this episode is highlighting, is the tech piece. And I'm so excited to get into that with you. But before we get into the tech and Billups analytics and talking about that, because I'm really excited to talk about your attention dashboard if we have some time. But before we get into that tech piece is to talk about measurement. And the reason I want to talk about measurement is because it is such a key focus for us as a market in South Africa and across the continent. There's a lot of markets in Africa that don't have any measurement for out of home. There's some that are progressing. Luckily in South Africa, we've moved to a space where we do have a currency. It's just, however, not being utilized for all the panels and faces that are in our market. We've had some local and international players enter our market. But what we're finding is there's this mix of, and this is what I'm interested to hear your insight on, is we're finding a mix of fixed survey-based measurement and then your real-time mobile performance-based data, I like to call it, right? Like we've got that mix that's happening in the market at the moment, and it is causing some confusion and complexities. And I would like to say even tension, particularly for the buyers on the buy side, the clients and the agencies, because now there's different measurement metrics. And I wanted to see if that is, and find out from you, I wanted to find out if you're finding that in any of the markets that you've entered into, or any of the markets that you've overseen, and what your thoughts are on that, and how can you get the two to work together to ultimately drive, the medium forward?
Yeah, definitely. Do I have the answer to it? I don't know. I have a point of view, maybe is the fair view. It is measurement and out of home has moved on leaps and bounds, and will continue to do so. Being from the UK originally, I think Root is fantastic in what it's provided for the market. Likewise, in the Netherlands, they have BRO, which is again a great measurement methodology and system. But I think that's one of the things of when you look at measurement in the markets, everyone has slightly nuanced methodologies and everyone has slightly nuanced data sets of where they're getting it from, whether it's a survey or real time. So I think one of the key bits that I see is that at least within the market, there needs to be alignment. So there's a common currency within that market. Ideally, across the world, there's a common methodology and the way you get the data, whether that's survey or real time. And then we're all laughing because we all measure it in the same way, and isn't this fantastic? That's never going to happen, right? Let's be truthful. We can hope for it, but it's just never going to happen. So the way, as Billups, we're looking at it is that you have your currencies in market. So you use the Root in the UK, you use Bro in the Netherlands, and FAW in Germany. So you look to trade with that currency, but then you look to layer over real-time data of when the campaign ran, so you can report on it truly, as well as use data to be able to plan more effectively. Because the great thing, again, with both data and technologies coming together, we can be more targeted to our audiences. But there is a word of warning there, right? You don't want to be so targeted that you're not seen. And I think there's a middle ground on it all. And I think some people are going, we can target you at this specific second and this specific minute of the day. That's all well and good, but you've got to remember, out of home's a one-to-many. It is a broadcast channel. Great, we should be proud to be a broadcast channel. And we should be proud that we've got another tool in our toolkit of being a targeted broadcast channel. We do need to ensure that there's a common currency in that one market, and then certain international players or players locally then need to look at how do they respect the currency, but then enhance the channel through maybe their own proprietary technology and data.
What I'm understanding from that is, like, the way forward is that you have that foundation, right, of that currency of your measurement, right? For a lot of the mature markets, it is a survey-based fixed measurement. So you have that as your foundation, and then you're layering on top of it the mobile or the real-time data, right? And that's more to, yes, it can help guide planning, but it's also really, really critical for the reporting piece, because that's where you're needing to showcase, how did this perform? Did you actually reach that many people? How long were they there? What was that dwell time? What was the frequency? And then it leads me into the piece around attribution, which is something that I know Billups has focused quite heavily on and been a huge focus. And what I loved is, Billups has been positioning and really driving out of home, not just as a broad reach channel and what it's fantastic at, right? Like this mass broad reach brand equity driver, but also as a performance channel, which is much like digital advertising. And I know that Billups has really been positioning and driving out of home in that way. And that leads me into the attribution piece. And what's something that I know is a global focus, it is a regional focus here as well as a local focus, is what would your advice be on what types of steps could media owners and media agencies in our market do to start looping in attribution into their campaigns and into their reporting?
Yeah. I'm probably going to take it on a bit of a journey round, but I think one of the key things is also around how we talk about it. So if you think about digital, reporting is an imperative part of digital media. It's 50% of what a planner is doing is the reporting side of it. Where if you look at out of home historically, 90% is the planning, 5% is the activation, and 5% is the reporting. It's this afterthought. But if you look at how digital agencies or digital teams are talking about their channel, when they're giving an objective or an KPI on the brief, the first thing they'll have in their slides are, right, your KPI is X. This is how I'm going to report against it. This is how I'm going to see if this was a success or there's room for work. They lay that out straight away. How do they prove that the campaign is delivered against the KPI? So I think that's one thing we need to do is make sure we're talking about reporting at the start of our conversations with clients. And then also the other side is when you look at digital or other channels, it's always a test and learn. You test, you iterate, you go again, you improve, you improve, you improve. When you look at out of home, what's happened historically with certain brands, they'll do a test, it didn't quite work or didn't live up to the expectation, and they'll go, well, it didn't work, I'm not going to do that for another 5 years. Where in digital, if it doesn't work, it's like, it didn't work, but the next campaign, I'm going to try this. So we need to be talking about testing and learning versus we'll try it, it didn't work, don't do it. We have to be talking in that language that everything we're doing is trying to improve what we did last time overall. And I think when it comes to the reporting, it does come back to setting out what is your measurement framework, so that KPI, how are you going to measure against it, and setting out, this is how I'm going to do it, and this is the data I'm going to use to answer that question. Because if you don't do that, you've got a KPI and you're answering it with something completely different or reporting against something completely different to what you want to do. So I think the key bit, even before you get into any of the data, is ensuring you have that measurement framework in place and you agree to, this is the KPI and this is how I'm going to measure that in out of home.
From Sunrise in Josie to lights that never sleep, we are Network X outdoor media specialists. With over 1,000 media platforms across Gauteng, we don't just place ads. We capture audiences right where life happens. From premium digital displays to iconic city views, we turn attention into impact every single day. So join the experience. Network X out of home.
It's a good point that you've outlined the way that campaign objectives are set up with clear KPIs, right? When you're briefed or at the start of planning. And then I love how you kind of outline the campaign process as you spend all this time planning and so little time reporting. And I hadn't actually thought about the link between the reporting happening at the end. And sometimes the reporting is simply the site Bible. Sometimes that's kind of as advanced in inverted commas as it gets. As a market, we should be doing better than that, and we should be doing more for our clients around post-campaign reporting. But sometimes in its simplest form, it's just the proof of flighting images, and that's the end of it. And I think what I love about what you've been sharing is that we should move the focus on what are we going to report at the end of this very successful campaign that we've run? What will we report on? We should be thinking about that in the planning phase or when we're receiving the brief from the client up front to assess what are the KPIs that we're going to be measured against to know if it's successful. I also love that you touched on how in digital and other channels, there seems to be an openness from the beginning to test and learn, adapt and change. We're going to do A/B testing on the creative and adjust it as we need to if needed be. And there's almost this process of like a flow and an ease and a flexibility to it. And sometimes I think with the nature of out of home, from a cost perspective and a scale perspective, there's very seldom this fluidity. If you've got like a digital out of home campaign, yes, there's a level of fluidity, but not a lot of brands are changing their creative frequently during their campaigns. That's something that I think still needs to be improved on in the market. Often once the digital out of home campaign goes live, there's a bit of set and forget in some cases that it's live and we move on to the next thing. So I love that idea of don't have a client that's going to wait another 2 years to be active in out of home again to see, oh, we should have adjusted this or we should have changed that, or what's our approach going to be, even if it means instead of booking for a year, that client books for 6 months with the intention of testing and learning throughout, or for the next period to take the learnings over and not waiting for that cycle to come around so long before they see the full benefit that out of home can give them as a channel. A piece that I want to build onto that is, I think if you have put a lot of thought and intention in how the reporting will be handled in the planning phase, you can also prep the client to say, we'd like to include full robust reporting at the end with attribution metrics. So would you be willing or able to share any stats from your side with us? For example, a percentage uplift in sales, or potentially if you've seen a spike on website traffic on your side, or if there've been additional leads, or, you loop the client into that journey with you too, which I think closes it quite nicely that yes, there are metrics the agency and the media owners can be working on, but I think that the client piece there is also quite critical.
Having those informed client conversations are critical to be able to have those partnerships where you can actually develop award-winning work, right? And a work that really moves the needle. What I wanted to just shift our gears to now is to talk about Billups analytics and to talk about tools and tech. And in particular, I'm excited if you can just explain a little bit more about the attention dashboard. It talks about an AI scoring of the effectiveness of the panels. And I'm not sure if this Billups analytics is a tool that you have available in all the markets that you operate in, or if there's only specific markets that you utilize it. But if you can just tell us a little bit more about this tool, and that can help obviously drive some inspiration for our market for the types of tools and tech that we should be looking at using to obviously streamline our processes.
We're launching across all markets per se, but really 19 that we have offices based there. But what we're basically looking at is a dashboard. So obviously telling you information around what your campaign's going live. So looking at that reach and frequency, both as what's the currency, but then also actually what is happening on the ground. So if you're looking at, for argument's sake, it's a marathon. If you're looking at the industry norm of reporting or audience delivery, it's sort of looking at that month or that week, and there's a slight spike, but it doesn't really show it. Where when a marathon's on, you know that actually footfall is going to go up tenfold, so we can start to show that. And then when it looks, attention is a metric that everyone's talking about, whether that's an out of home or across media in general, and advertising. We look to the location of the screen or the panel, and then through some technology, we look at what is interfering or what drives the attention within that view shed. So for one, if a panel is facing at me, that means it's targeting me versus anyone behind it. So there's a view shed for one. And then within that view shed, what is there? Is there a tree? Is there a neon light? Is there loads of traffic? Is there a traffic light? All of those things are all fighting for attention of the consumer. And what we look to do is try and score how does the panel compare to the environment that it sits in, because you can have, when we look at different locations across a city, if you're in the neighborhood of residential neighborhood, a bus shelter, a 6-sheet is the biggest format that you see there, and you're like, that is impactful, right? That's your local notice board. You get into the city center where there's shops every angle, there's neon lights, everything going on. It's about how does that panel situation work overall, that then we can allow you to put an attention score against it.
I love that. And I'll tell you why, because part of the principles that Liv and I follow with regards to evaluating out of home and scoring out of home, right? Obviously not through an AI tool yet. We're not there yet, but hopefully we can be soon, is that, we are evaluating the impact of the site in relation to its surroundings. So not impact as in size of the site, impact in relation to its context and surroundings. As you were saying now, like, a bus shelter in a suburb area or a smaller format, right, in a suburb area where there's no other out of home and there's no other major distractions, big lights, neon signs, as you were mentioning, it's going to get a lot more attention. It's going to have more impact for that consumer in that environment, is how I'm understanding this attention-based scoring. If we were looking at it from that evaluation point of view of the impact to its surroundings, what is happening from an attention point of view in an environment like that, right? What is the score of the attention in that environment? So I think that is quite a critical part of the planning process, but incredible that you've incorporated that into your tool, also from an AI automated evaluation and effectiveness evaluation of the panels. I think that's phenomenal. And I know that you were saying it's still being built out. I really can't wait to hear and read more about it as it gets to its maturity and you guys start using it more.
As we head towards our close, Andrew, I wanted to ask you a question about sustainability. We know that it's a major theme from an industry perspective, and globally it's a huge theme. We've seen each market come to market with different ways that they're focusing on how they can, make sure that they are being sustainable from their printing process perspective, from adjusting the lighting on their digital screens. And I wanted to find out from you, sitting centrally from an EMEA perspective, what have you seen across some of the markets, how they are approaching the sustainability challenge?
I think every market's got a slightly different nuance route, and within every market, there's slightly different nuance route with each media owner. I think naturally, as technology is improving, LED signs are far better for the environment than the original ones that we were seeing, or the early screens that are there, and how much power is being used. I think JCDecaux, to call them out, are great, right? They truly do invest in the media channel, and they invest in the latest kit and the best kit. And when everyone was starting the renewable energy or the sort of the sustainable route, JCDecaux were part of the RE100 of the UN 10 years ago. So before it was even something that you must do or you seem to be doing, they were already pushing that forward. So I think they're always a good, along with other media owners, there's plenty who are pushing that agenda. So I think there's a large element there that we need to ensure that we're investing in the environment. I think it's inherent that out of home is a creative platform for good, that you can touch it, you can feel it. It's amazing that you can, project on a side of a wall to be on a bus shelter. And I think the fantastic thing of out of home is that it helps fund the city's infrastructure. So it takes people out of their one car onto a bus. So it takes 100 cars away to put them onto a bus or onto a train. And it helps fund transport networks that we see. So I think inherently, out of home is a channel that, as I say, it's in its DNA to support sustainability. I think as technology continues to improve on printing, LED sites, we're only becoming better and better in what energy we're using to show ads in the location. How are people reporting on it? There's a lot of work to be had, but there's some great work being done trying to bring sort of a similar methodology across the market. So we're, again, going back to the same way of how we're measuring audiences. There needs to be that standard currency, because it is a space that is in its early days, but there needs to be alignment of people aren't scoring in different ways, because everyone has to score at the same way for the actual industry to move forward. And that consistency. And I think that's imperative for anything we do in the channel, is consistency. We make it as easy as possible for brands, advertisers, etc., to use the channel itself.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we have spoken about measurement, we've spoken about attribution, we've spoken about Billups analytics and the tools, we've spoken about sustainability now, and I think we've really gone full circle on those key global focus trends, but also huge trends and areas of focus for us here in Africa and in South Africa. And to hear your perspective from an international EMEA seat, it really does drive and push us to hold ourselves accountable in the areas that we need to develop and to really drive growth and change and obviously increase spend to the out-of-home medium here in our market. So I really wanted to say thank you for taking your time to share those insights and your perspective. And really, we will be watching what Billups is doing. We're really excited. I see that you guys have entered Mexico recently, so congratulations on that. And we will keep obviously a watchful eyes to see how you build and expand. And we really appreciate you guys, flying the out-of-home flag high and just keep pushing things forward. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today to go beyond the billboard. Subscribe to our podcast to ensure you don't miss out on our exciting content.
Join us again to go beyond the billboard.
1, 2.